an honor.
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
To the living God.
to the living God.
No one can deny.
No one can deny
that Jesus Christ.
that Jesus Christ is the Most High. Let's go.
But my guess is that most of you in this room realize that accepting Christ comes with some challenges. That is not all rosy once you accept Jesus Christ into your life. That even after you accept Christ into your life, you still have to go through some stuff. And I know that challenges our modern day theology, which tells us if we just accept Christ in our life, we can name it and claim it. You know, healing comes our way. We won't suffer anymore. We'll have what we want. God will give us anything. But the reality of it is that you start a race. Paul likens it to a marathon. He likens it to a long race. So before I go to God in prayer, I want you just to take a second and just think about your Christian walk. Think about what it's been like since the day that you accepted Jesus Christ into your life. Think about your present walk, the present marathon that you're in, with your kids, with your wife, with your family, at your job. So I want to start today with running the Christian race. Let me tell you a little bit about my situation, what happened with me. I just want to share something. Some of you guys already know this, but I want to share it with you again because we left Birmingham on a mission to come to Charlotte and start this church. That was our calling. We heard clearly from God and He moved things. He basically picked us up and moved us. We got to Charlotte in 2006. In 2008, the economy fell apart. Everything that we had in Birmingham was pretty much gone. The bank that moved us here dissolved overnight. And we went from a situation where we were completely secure. God, we're running a race for you. Things are great in our lives. We can see the ministry. We're following you. To overnight, God, what's happening? God, I'm scared. Have I moved my family? Have I gotten out of order with you? What have I done wrong? Have I put my family in danger? Will I be able to feed my family? How can we start a ministry? How can we even begin to run this race? Looked around. Everything that I trusted was crumbling around me. Nothing was in my control. I had no control over anything. I looked at my wife and my children and I thought, oh my God, I'm surely going to fail at this race. I got on an airplane going to San Francisco, meet my new boss. And I remember sitting on the airplane. We hit a little bit of patch of turbulence. And instead of getting scared, I remember thinking, if this plane crashed, probably the best thing that happened to us. I remember thinking that if this plane crashed, my wife and kids would get insurance money. They'd be able to pay off their house and they'll be able to live comfortably. I began to think to myself, if this plane crashed, I would not be sad. Maybe you've had a situation, if this plane crash situation in your life. Maybe you've been in a place in your life where you didn't want to commit suicide. No. You were not at that point. But you had the thought run through your mind that, hey, you know what? Death wouldn't be so bad right now. I'm so far over my head that I actually look forward to the rest that comes with death. As God began to speak to my heart about this situation, he began to say to me, maybe it's not every person here. There's some people who have been in that if this plane crashes position in their life. They know what I'm talking about. They know what it's like to get to a place where you cannot see. You are just about hopeless. See, people do not commit suicide on day one.
Come on. Amen.
Let me say it another way. People don't walk out of their marriage on day one.
Amen.
Let me say it another way. Children don't drop out of school on day one.
Amen.
Let me say it again. People don't walk off their job on day one. Day one is the place when they begin to feel like they can't go much further. And then that feeling goes to a place called hopelessness. And then after hopelessness comes despair. And then all of a sudden, you're in a place. Suicide is a good option. Depression is a good option. Depression becomes your friend. You know, misery becomes your company.
That's right. Amen.
Paul talks about the Christian walk as a marathon. He talks about it as a marathon in which we all have to run. You know, from the day that you raised your hand, you came to the front, you gave your heart to God, and you gave your hand to the church. From that day forward, you're on a marathon.
Amen.
That marathon doesn't end until the day that Jesus comes back in a cloud and calls you, whether you are living or whether you're dead, and you come and receive your crown.
Amen.
It's a marathon is what we're on. That's what we've been called to do. We've been called to run a marathon. You've been called to run a marathon in your life, in your Christianity, with your children, at your job. You've been called to run a marathon in your marriage and in every relationship that you have. You're running a marathon for Christ.
Amen.
That's who you represent every day of your life. Every single day of your life, you represent a marathon. Any of us that have seen a marathon on television or witnessed a marathon or run a marathon, we know that the celebration only happens when what? You cross the line. And people who are not prepared, when they hit the obstacles of the marathon, they quit. And so what I want to do today is I want to begin to talk with you about the marathon that we call the Christian life. Hey, this is a marathon. It's full of obstacles, just like a real marathon. I want to look at a few obstacles, and then I want to show you what Paul and Jesus show us for how we get over those obstacles. And then finally, I want to show you the reward. That's a reward to each and every one of you for every sacrifice that you make in order to run this marathon. There is a reward.
Amen.
So first of all, let's look at the obstacles in the race. In every marathon, in every long race, even in every short race, there are obstacles. It wouldn't be a race unless there were obstacles. You've got to overcome the obstacles in order to win the race. Winning the race is so much more than crossing the finish line. It's about your mastery of the obstacles. So I want to look at a couple of obstacles that show up in any race. First of all, fear. You know, so many people never even run the marathon because they fear that they can't complete it. So many people never even try to do the thing that God has called them to do because they fear that they're going to fail at it. It takes great strength and boldness to step out on faith after God has called you toward a ministry. And the thing that separates most of us from doing the thing that God has called us to do is fear. But I like what the psalmist said over in the 37th Psalm. He says, fret not. In other words, fear not. You have a God with a strong arm, and no matter what you're going through, no matter what your marathon, because every one of us is running our own race. We've got our own set of challenges. We have our own set of circumstances. Every one of us, at some point in that race, will have some fear. The next obstacle we see is the obstacle of distractions. Paul says, take off the weight of all those things that distract you. Get rid of that stuff. If you ever notice a runner, they wear as few clothes and as light of clothing as possible. Because when you're running 20-some miles, it actually makes a difference in 1 pound. And listen, so many times in our walk with Christ, we are bombarded with distractions. You have other folk who literally want you to carry them on their marathon or to run their marathon for them. Amen. Your boss has a marathon that she has to run or he has to run, and he wants you to help him run that or her run that marathon. Your husband or your wife, they have a marathon that they're running, and guess what? They want you to run a little piece of it for them. Your children, they've been called on a marathon, and you know what they want? They want you to run a piece of it for them. And what Paul tells us is we have to get to a place where we don't allow things to distract us, because listen, there will never be a perfect opportunity for you to run the race for Christ. There'll always be a rehearsal to go to, or a program to be at, or some type of a function, something that your husband or your wife needs, or something that your boss needs. But we have to be able to understand that distractions may come, but we can't allow ourselves to be distracted. Amen. Next thing we have here is expectations. Expectations that we put on ourselves and expectations that we put on others. You know, many times runners never run the marathon because they've put an expectation so high where they want their time to be that they practice and practice and practice, and they never can get those times right. And so you know what they do? They won't even run. It's not enough for them to finish the marathon, but they've already programmed an expectation inside of their head of how fast they need to be running that which week and what day. If you think about it, isn't expectations one of the things, I don't want to sign up for that because I think the expectation will be too high. An expectation that I place on myself, if I sign up for something is too high. You put an expectation so high that it limits you from even trying. Amen. I like what Paul says over in Romans 8. He says, who can bring an accusation against God's elect? He said it's me and Jesus that's running the show. No man, including ourselves, can put expectations so high on us and judge us to the point that we're not willing to go forward. All those expectations are secondary to what God has called us to do. Amen. And then bad attitudes. You know, it's one thing that, runners of a marathon may be from many different countries. They may be all different races. But the one thing that a marathon runner has in common with another marathon runner is an attitude of success and discipline. It takes an attitude of success and discipline in order to run the marathon, and it takes an attitude of success and discipline in order to run the Christian marathon. Then the final one is hurt. And you can imagine what it's like to have a pulled hamstring and then have to go out and run a marathon. You can imagine what it's like to have a broken leg and have to go out and run a marathon, or a torn ACL. But also, when you've had those problems in the past, they tend to follow you into an event like a marathon. And listen, so many of us, we're so broken. We've been through so much in our past. And I'm not here to in any way downplay anything that anybody's been through. We're all hurt in some way. Amen. We're all broken in some way. We have all struggled in some area of our life. We've made some mistakes. We've done the wrong thing. Paul says that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And so no matter what hurt, what brokenness, what pain, no matter what you've been through, God is willing and able to accept you and use you. Amen. He wants to use you to help others to see how to run this race. Other people who've been hurt and broken. He wants to use you as an example for your children and for your neighbors and for your family and your sisters and mama and all of them. So, let's take a second to understand the Christian race. I want to just read a few verses with you. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting at 24th verse. It says, don't you know? Don't you know? I like the way Paul asks those questions sometimes. What you been doing? Have you not been paying attention? Have you not been listening? Don't you know that runners in the stadium all race? Why would they be in the stadium if they're not going to race? But only one receives the prize. He says, run in such a way to win the prize. I like what Paul is saying here. He says, don't you know that all Christians are in this thing in order to glorify God? That's what he's saying. You can't be a runner in the race and not run. You can't accept Christ into your life and not be disciplined and be a disciple of him. He says, but only one receives the prize. He says, run in such a way to get the prize. And so I've been struggling with this. Matter of fact, me and Christian, we spent some time talking about this last night. And I came to this conclusion based on what the Holy Spirit was saying to my heart. He says, only one can win the prize. What does he mean by that? Paul always talks about two people inside of each and every one of us. So sometimes he calls it the flesh and the spirit. Sometimes he calls it the old man and the new man. But he's always talking about this dichotomy that lives inside of each and every one of us. And as I began to pray and as me and Christian began to have a conversation last night, it became clear to me that Paul is teaching us that in your race, only one person is going to win. It's either going to be the old you or the new you. It's either going to be your flesh or it's going to be your spirit. But there's only one winner in this race for your life. And at the end of your life, at the end of the race, your legacy will speak to one runner. I think it hurts me to kind of see Bill Cosby going through this. I don't know whether he did it or not. I think we've got a point now with 20-some plus women coming forward. It looks bleak. But what a demonstration before all of our eyes of what it means for the flesh to win the race in your life. Well, what a demonstration in front of all of our lives, what it means when the old man wins the race. It ruins your legacy. Doesn't matter how much you gave or what you did. Nobody even talks about that anymore about Bill Cosby. They stripped away every single degree and accolade. They've taken down signs and street signs and taken his name off of college buildings. And the wrong man won. The wrong man won the race. And if we're not careful, we can live a life in which the wrong man wins. None of us want to be remembered as the wrong man. We all want to be remembered as the spirit man, as the new man. But it takes discipline in order for us to win the race. I like this word that they use for run. It's treko. In the Greek, it means the same thing as a track. But they use this word to describe run because it talks about running not from the perspective of how you run, how fast you run, or how great you run, but it talks about the attitude of running. It talks about runners in this sense are people with an attitude of excellence. They come to this to be a winner. They don't want to be second. They don't enter into a race like this in order to be third or fourth or 10th. But every single one of those runners in this kind of a race gets in the race in order to do what? Win. Tracker. Isn't that a beautiful thing for us? Because it lets us know we need to run with purpose. We need to run to win. We need to run to bring God glory. Let's go to the next verse. It says, 25. Now everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. However, they do it to receive a crown that will fade away. But we, a crown that never fades. He says, everybody who comes to compete, they come to compete so that they can what? Win. They want to win a crown that never fades, that Christian crown, that crown that Jesus will bring when he come out of the heaven. That's what we're after. That's the reward that we're after. But in order to get that, he says, we have to exercise self-control in everything. See, what you have to understand is these runners, they spent 10 months a year preparing. They couldn't even be entered into the race unless they had someone who is a professional to sign off that they've done right, lived right, ate right, exercised right for 10 straight months. You're automatically disqualified if you didn't. So for 10 months of their life, they exercised all types of self-control. They didn't party, they didn't drink, they didn't eat certain things. They exercised around the clock. They did everything that they could do. And they did all this so that they could receive a crown made out of celery. Celery. And Paul is saying, hey, if these guys will work around the clock, put in hours a day. Think about this. Outliers say in order for you to be a professional in anything, it takes 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. These guys dedicated their lives from the age of 7 in order to run this race. Amen. Now, they'll do that for a piece of celery, which is already on its way to being dead when it's cut and the crown is made. What would we do for a crown that we get from Jesus?
Come on. That's good.
I like this word competes in the Greek, which means agony. And what Paul is communicating to us is that this run, this whole thing that we own, this Christian walk, this thing about being a Christian father, this thing about being a Christian mother, this thing about being a Christian single, this thing about being a Christian child, this whole Christian walk is a walk of agony. And it's hard to deny your flesh. Amen. It's difficult to give up some things. It's hard to come here on a Saturday when it's raining. It's difficult to be a good single Christian. It's difficult to be a good man and a Christian man at all times. Amen. It's agony. You're constantly going through situations in which you are crucifying your flesh. You're killing yourself daily. You're getting up every morning. You saying the old you are dead. Get back inside of that coffin. Don't you get up. Verse 26 says, therefore, I do not run like one who runs aimlessly, or box like one beating the air. I don't just run so that people can see me running. You know, I'm not just trying to say I'm a Christian and then I do some things on Saturday or Sunday and then the rest of the week I'm just running around aimlessly or boxing the air. You know, when he talks about boxing the air, he talks about those boxers that are not good. They're throwing punches but not hitting nobody. And let me tell you something. When you're running this fake Christian race, you are just like a boxer who is throwing punches. You're not hitting nobody. You're not fooling nobody. People see right through you. Amen. Paul says, I don't do this thing aimlessly. I I don't just run just to be running. So I see a lot of people running. I'm just going to run with them. There's a scene in Forrest Gump where he's running across the nation. And as he goes through different cities, people just start running with him. They have no idea why he's running or where he's running to or what he's doing. But they're just, somebody's running, then a crowd's running, and I'm going to run with that crowd. And so many people get pulled into the Christian marathon because the folk around them were running, but they have no idea what it's about. Amen. 27 says, instead, he says, instead of doing that fake running stuff, that just showing, just trying to make people think that I'm saved all the time, and all that stuff that people do, not you people. Instead of doing that, I discipline my body and bring it under strict control. The words that he used as I began to go into the Greek form, those words indicate that Paul and other boxers during that time would actually punch themselves to get a crust under their eyes so that when they fought somebody else, they could take more licks. That's the kind of discipline that he was talking about. I remember when I was online. And the first time they hit you with that paddle, it hurts bad. But over time, you develop what they call a crust. And those licks don't hurt as bad. And after you've been hit 100, 200, 300 times. And that's what Paul is talking about here. I discipline my body in the most extreme way. I didn't just give up chocolate. I didn't just give up alcohol for Lent. No, I disciplined myself in an extreme way. I changed the way I used to be. I let the old man die completely, and I got up a new man, and I let his habits, Lord have mercy, stay down there with him. Amen. All right, let's look at a few things about this Christian race, because this Christian race, it requires some things of you. First of all, it requires you to have an attitude of Jesus. You've got to think like Jesus. You've got to constantly be in communication, in prayer, learning, reading, doing everything that you can in order to understand what Jesus would do in any situation. Let me tell you something. You can't get into the situation and then begin to try to figure out what to do. Let me say that another way. You can't get the call at 12 o'clock and make the right decision, singles. Y'all don't hear me, do you? All right, men, kids, You can't wait until the child gets in trouble to then understand how we're supposed to discipline our children. You hear me? You hear me now? And what we have to have is an attitude of Jesus. The old WWJD. What would Jesus do? In every instance of this race, the next thing you have to do is we have to endure through agony. Man, it's hard. Who ever knew that signing up for something so good would be so hard? Man, it's a struggle. Man, sometimes I get up and I don't even want to move forward. But I have to understand that's part of it. That better days are coming, that the same God that was with me before I got into this situation is going to be the same God with me in the situation. It may feel like agony today, but it's celebration tomorrow. Amen. You have to understand that your test today is your testimony tomorrow, and that God will use that testimony to be able to go out and find people just like you and make a difference. Next thing we have to do is we have to act with purpose. Paul says, I didn't just run just to be seen running. I'm not just boxing, just hitting the air. How we see sometimes you see people on the side of the street just throwing their fist around, wasting time. He says, no. I live my life with purpose. Everything I did was to bring Christ glory. Everything I said to every single person. I just didn't use a lot of words on this Christian walk. So you can't use a lot of words. Talking while running a marathon is a no-no. You got to choose your words carefully and use words that bring God glory and that encourage others. And then the final thing he shows is that we have to have self-control. Listen, you cannot be successful on this Christian walk without self-control. Yes, there are some places that you can no longer go. And yes, there are some things that you can no longer do. And yes, there is some music that you got no business listening to. Amen. When you accept Christ into your life. So now let's talk about the reward. I want to talk about the reward, and I want to look at a few verses here that Jesus gives us. He explains this marathon to us, and he also gives us a reward in the same time. Verse 24 says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wants to come with me," if you want to be with Jesus, if you want to come with me, if you want to be a part of this discipleship, this Christian walk, if you want to run in the race, you want to be a runner in this race, then you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus. Isn't that everything we just talked about? Isn't that everything Paul just told us? You got to deny yourself. That's basically putting yourself up under strict control, self-discipline, doing the right thing. You know, when you want to do something that you know you shouldn't do, you have to deny yourself. He says, pick up your cross. Isn't that agony when you think about the cross? Have you thought about the cross? Have you thought about what they had to do? You know, most theologians now agree that it wouldn't the nails wouldn't have went through the hand. No way that your hand, the way it's made, could have ever held anybody on a cross. But they had to put it through his wrist. They had to lift him up on that cross and put nails through his ankles. He didn't die instantly. Do you understand that? He didn't die instantly. See, we get confused in this whole thing because we think that because salvation is free, that we can do anything that we want to do. We can say anything that we want to say. It doesn't require any self-discipline. But let me tell you something today. Salvation is free, but it wasn't cheap. Amen. Amen. You got saved for free, but it wasn't cheap. You gave your child an iPad for Christmas. He got a free gift, but it wasn't cheap. And what do you expect him to do with that gift that you paid $700 for? You expect for him to hold it close to him and to take it everywhere he goes and to protect it from everything. And when you walk into his room or her room and that $700 iPad is on the ground, how does that make you feel as a parent? Get past the anger first. But how does that make you feel as a parent when you give somebody something that was free but not cheap, and they treat it as something that was cheap? Right. Amen. Have no respect for your sacrifice. Amen. Verse 25, he says, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will find it." In other words, when you sacrifice for Christ, you win. Now, I know we've been taught that it's all about us. This is the American way. This is what you've been taught. Don't try to deny it. You know how you feel. You know how you've been taught that everything's about you, that you pulled your own self up, that every decision that you made was all about you and you ought to put yourself first. But what Jesus teaches us is the exact opposite. 26 says, what will it benefit a man if he gains the whole world, if he gets the job, if he gets the wife, if he gets the car, if he gets the house, if he gets everything that he ever wants, yet loses his life? Well, what does it profit a man if the old him wins, but the new him loses? Well, what does it profit a man if the flesh wins, but the spirit loses? What does it profit a man? He says, or what will a man give in exchange for his life? verse 27. It says, for the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will what? Reward each according to what he has done. He said, the Son of Man, I'm coming back. I'm coming back to being sent by my Father. And when I get back, I'm going to reward everybody who ran the race in the right way. Amen. He said, I'm going to reward every single person who denied himself, picked up his cross, and followed me with his life. I got to a point where I began to ask myself this question. Is the prize worth it? Is the prize worth it? Is all this self-discipline and all this hard work and all this agony that I'm taking myself through, is it worth it? Amen. Let me say it another way. Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Come on. That's good. Amen.
Is working this hard for this ministry worth it? Is working this hard for my family, is it worth it? Is working to be a Christian man in my community, is it worth it? And the answer for me and for you is yes, it is. I talked to you earlier about that whole situation when we moved here and all the stuff we went through, all the agony, all the pain, how difficult it was. But when I walked in here today and I saw those children practicing, singing songs about God, the prize is worth it. Let me talk to somebody right now. Your family's worth it. Your wife is worth it. All the sacrifices you're making men in order to be a Christian father and to do all the things, missing the game and doing all that stuff, spending time with your children and with your grandchildren, it's worth it. Ladies, all the sacrifices that you're making to provide for the family and work a job and everything that you're doing, it's worth it. Raising these children. And when they walk across the stage and they look back and they say, I love you, you will realize at that point that it was worth every sacrifice that you made. Staying in school, doing the homework, doing all the stuff that you have to do in order to graduate, it is worth it. The prize is worth it. When you run the Christian run or walk the Christian walk or crawl the Christian crawl, however you make it across the finish line, it is worth it. It requires some sacrifice. It requires some denying of yourself and your own wants and your own flesh, but you don't need that stuff anyway. You got to go through a little bit of agony. You got to pick up your cross daily. It requires you to pray and be in tune with God. But if you do these three things, if you do these three things, God gives you a prize that you will always have for the rest of your life. First of all, he gives you a legacy, the right man won in your life. A legacy that touches the lives of your family and your community and your church. But secondly, and most importantly, you get to hear God say, job well done. So I got something for you to think about this week. I want you to get this in your spirit this week. It says, running the Christian race for my life will require tremendous sacrifice. Listen to me, guys. Before Jesus begins to talk with these disciples and tell them about denying yourself and picking up your cross and following me, there's an instance where Peter, Jesus is telling them about him getting ready to be sacrificed and getting ready to be killed. And Peter jumps out and says, no, I'm not going to let that happen. We don't have to do that. No, no, no. You're the Messiah. You don't have to go through that. You don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to do these things. And Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Satan, get behind me. Let me tell you something. There's a demon. God showed me this. There's a demon that has been unleashed throughout these United States of America, and that demon is constantly telling us, you don't have to sacrifice, you don't have to work hard, you can microwave your life, you don't have to go to work, you can lay out today, you don't have to be faithful to your wife, you'll get another one, you don't have to work hard and submit to your husband, you'll get another one, you don't have to finish school, you don't have to put in any work.
Come on.
There's nothing in life, in the Christian walk, that you get without sacrifice. Every single day of our lives, we have to wake up, deny our old selves, pick up our cross, and follow Jesus. To God be the glory.
Here we stand in the presence of our Savior.
It's an honor
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
to the living God.
to the living God.
No one can
No
deny
one can deny
that Jesus
that
Christ
Jesus Christ is